Back in January of 2001, I went down to Florida with my family while my father was working there. We didn't want to stay in a hotel because we had just bought a camper, so we decided to go camping. We stayed at the Hillsborough River State Park. One day, I took my bike out around 2 p.m. The camp had a few trails to ride on, so I decided to take one. As I was riding my bike, I stopped, looked over the ledge at a few alligators that I had spotted. I heard a rustling in the trees and thought maybe it was a gator, so I got steady on my bike and got ready to take off. As I was looking around, though, I noticed a tall, dark brown hairy figure just standing there looking at me. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, so I looked harder at it, and it took off running. I would also like to take a note that it was running on 2 feet, not 4. I rode my bike back to my camper as fast as I could, and elaborately told my mother and my sister that I had just seen a Bigfoot. They both claimed I was crazy, told me it was a black bear, because the camp guide told us not to leave food out. They had some of them in the area, and so black bear were very common. But I'm telling you, I am most certain that this was not a bear, because this thing stood up at least 7.5 feet tall and ran upwards on 2 feet. Bears can't do that. I know what I saw, and ever since then, I've been fascinated with this creature. I know for sure that it's out there. A follow-up investigation report was done by Kathy Betts. I had the chance to speak to JS on the phone, and he had these details to add. In January 2001, 16-year-old JS was visiting Florida with his family. They were camped at the Hillsborough River State Park between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on a sunny day with a temperature at about 65 degrees. JS decides to ride his bike up a trail that parallels the Hillsborough River. About a mile or so up the trail, JS noticed a place that he recognized from a previous canoe trip, so he stopped to see if there were still some alligators there that he had spotted earlier. He says this: "I was looking down a steep embankment towards the river when I heard something rustling some bushes to my right. I thought it might be an alligator, but when I looked, I saw this big thing standing there in the bushes, just 5 feet away from me. It was frozen, just looking at me while I looked at it. Then, it took off into the bushes. It was big." JS stated that he had about 10 seconds to observe it before it ran away. I think it freaked out, and that's why it ran. When I spotted it, it was sort of standing there in the bushes, frozen, like it was wondering if I would notice it. It didn't seem like it wanted to hurt me. I think I scared it as much as it scared me. After the creature ran off, JS stated that he got back onto his bike and pedaled faster than I've ever pedaled before. It took me until halfway back to camp to really realize that I had just seen a Bigfoot. Then, I began thinking, what if it's chasing me and steps out of the woods to clothesline me? But it never did. Deep down inside, I knew that it did not want to hurt me, but I was pretty scared by then. When I got back, I told my mom and sister that I had seen a Bigfoot. They explained to me that I probably saw a bear, actually. But it wasn't a bear, because bears don't run on 2 feet. I know it was a Bigfoot. JS stated that he saw the upper half of the creature, from the chest up. It was about 6 feet tall, and this thing stood about 1.5 feet taller than I was, so about 7.5 feet. Its shoulders were incredibly broad, about 3 feet across. I didn't notice any muscle definition because the hair was so matted, but it must have been pretty muscular. I mean, those shoulders were huge. JS didn't notice any hands, and the arms were kept at its sides. It didn't pump its arms like we run. They sort of just swung. It was covered with dark brown hair, that appeared very dirty and matted. And when it ran, JS did not observe any movement of its hair. It was definitely hair, not fur, but it was all matted and dirty, and didn't move much while it was running. Maybe it had been swimming in the river. Maybe that's why it looked so matted and dirty. Even the face was really dark. I couldn't tell what was hair or what was skin, because the color of its whole face was so dark. The eyes were also very dark. JS compared them to a dog's eyes when there are no whites showing. It had a smashed-in looking nose, compared it to being half human, half ape. The mouth and lips were wide and dark. There were no teeth seen. No ears were also seen. The head was elongated and oval-shaped. It was sort of pointed at the top, but not a sharp point. JS could also not determine a gender, and there was no odor present. It didn't make any sounds when it ran away, except for the breaking of limbs. JS also told me that he wished there was somebody else there with him when he had a sighting. Then, they would have believed me. I found his story to be very credible and believable. He was sincere, forthright, and did not attempt to embellish any details through expression or story. The sighting took place in the Hillsborough State Park, which is a 16,000-acre watershed that borders about another 10,000 acres of other wilderness and protected areas. It is part of an established wildlife corridor that extends from South Florida all the way to North Florida. Rich in wildlife, the terrain topography consists of swamps, pinelands, hardwood forests, prairies, and grasslands, as well as the Hillsborough River and its many tributaries. It's an ideal Bigfoot sanctuary. I, a female lady, was driving on a clear day on I-75 in the afternoon on a spring day from Sarasota to Tampa, going north 65 to 70 miles an hour on the far right lane. This was also back in 2012. This would also be on the east side of I-75. I had to take an exam in Tampa the next day, so I can tell you the exact date that I was traveling. My window was slightly open on the passenger's side, just to let in fresh air. I was driving on the far right side of the highway, in a very heavily tropical wooded area, when I saw what I first thought was a man, walking fast, about 50 feet away from the highway, in like a grassy meadow, with thick brush or tropical woods behind him. As I got closer, I saw that it was not a man, but a creature that looked like a man, but with approximately 3-inch long brown hair covering its or his entire body, from head to toe. When I was about parallel to this thing, it quickly went into the brush and wooded area, then vanished. It looked like tall, thick brush or woods. The creature appeared to be a male, around, I'm guessing, 6 to 7 feet tall. His or its body was very, very thick. Thick chest, thick legs, and very wide, thick shoulders. I could see the brown body hair as it turned its whole body all at once, bent its head down, and went into the brush. It was going north, the same direction as I, and walked quickly, with wide steps, with knees bent, before it turned into the brush. As I drove off, I couldn't get over what I'd saw. It happened in about 30 seconds' time. My car smelt like rotten eggs, sulfur, or just a strange, awful odor for about 10 minutes after. I was not afraid. It did not look scary at all, just very strange. It happened so fast and without warning. My car window was slightly open on the passenger's side to let air in because, well, it was a nice day out. But like I said, after the sighting, that terrible odor lingered. It was something bad, and it took a little bit of time for it to go away. I have not heard any other incidents except the woman who sent in photos of an ape-like creature known as the Mayaka ape. The creature I saw that day did not look anything like those photos. What I saw looked more human-like, with a thick body, covered in brown hair. It did not look like an ape, but it did have a very terrible smell. Also, this was between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. Clear, beautiful sunny day, about 75 degrees. There was a follow-up investigation report by BFRO investigator David Becara. I spoke with the witness by phone, and she seemed credible and sincere. Her sighting happened on her way to Tampa on a clear spring day just back in 2012. It was a nice cool day, by Florida standards, so she had her passenger side window cracked to let in fresh air. In an area near Little Manatee River State Park, she can't be sure as it was a long stretch of road, she noticed what she first thought was a man walking quickly, just 30 to 50 feet from the shoulder, heading north away from her. It was just a few feet from the woodline. As she neared the figure, she also noticed that it was covered in brown hair from head to toe. It was walking with long, purposeful strides, head and knees bent. The hair was 3 inches long, and definitely brown. She continued to describe it as much more man-like than ape-like. It had a round head like a man, and the arm length was normal, not long and down to the knees, but it was definitely covered in hair. As she came up next to it, it veered off towards the woodline, walked into the thickets, and disappeared, heading northbound. The witness never saw its face. She said that the thickets looked too dense for any man to just walk into, even for this large animal. She then noticed a very strong odor of rotten eggs / sulfur in the car, and had to roll the windows down for at least 10 minutes before it finally dissipated. She never felt any fear as she was in the car, and it never gave a reason to fear it. I was leaving St. Petersburg with the intentions of hitchhiking to Asheville, North Carolina. I had a friend drop me off at the I-75 North exit around 11 p.m. There was a lot of construction going on. Since it was getting late, I decided to camp for the night. I walked to the bridge that crosses the nearby river. I was planning on sleeping under the bridge, so I walked down underneath. I got myself somewhat comfortable. Then, I heard a couple of noises to the left of me, coming from the southbound bridge. I just played it off as a possum, or maybe a raccoon. Then, I heard it again. So, I decided to move closer to the river and hang my hammock in between 2 trees. I was texting people, then called my friend and talked to her, until about 2:30. Then we got off the phone since it was about to die. I went to sleep pretty quickly afterwards, but not for long. I wake up to a noise down by the river to my left. It was this weird cough grunt. I can't really explain it. I can't even mimic the sound, but I only heard it once. 10 to 15 minutes goes by and I hear another sound. This time, it's a low whistle from my right, next to the tree line. It lasts for 5 or 6 seconds, so I continue to lay there in silence. Another 10 to 15 minutes goes by and I start hearing rocks being thrown at me. This happened 5 or 6 times, every couple of minutes or so, followed by more silence. Not sure how long it lasted, but it was followed by the loudest crash I have ever heard in my life. I thought the tree I had tied my hammock to cracked. I nearly fell out. It sounded like thunder, gunshot, dynamite going off in my face. After that, I made up my mind to leave. I quickly packed up my hammock, headed back up the hill, crossing the bridge, and I caught a quick whiff of a skunk. Well, a skunk-like smell, I should say, and I could even feel a set of eyes on me. After that, I just decided that I would catch a bus back to North Carolina. There was a follow-up investigation done by R. Monteith. This witness originally called in his report and left a voicemail message. I was able to call him back, interview him, and had him report his encounter via the website. The witness was hitchhiking from St. Petersburg, Florida, to North Carolina. A friend had given him a ride to a location and dropped him off at approximately 11 p.m. Having nothing but a backpack and hammock, he walks further up I-75 and finds a location under a bridge, thinking he would just stay there for the night. It was now after 2 a.m., and while speaking on his phone, he heard a very low whistle. He thought it unusual to hear a bird at that time of night. He even attempted to recreate the sound to me, but concluded it was much lower in tone than he could possibly imitate. He did hear other noises, thinking they were raccoons, moved to the other side of the bridge, set up his hammock, and went to sleep. He awoke to a sound that he described to me as sounding like the raptor coughing in the kitchen from Jurassic Park. Gary Rydstrom, the man who created the raptor sound for the movie, got the sound from his neighbor's dog that had been surgically debarked. The witness was concerned as he had never heard that sound in the wild before. Shortly after that, there was another whistle. More silence. Then he realized something was throwing what seemed to be a golf ball-sized rock towards him. Suddenly, he hears a very loud tree knock. It was so close and loud that the witness thought one of the trees in his hammock was attached to had broken. He compares the sound as loud as a gunshot. At the time, he felt incredibly threatened, packed up and left the area. While leaving, he smelt a skunky odor, and like so many other witnesses, describes or felt as if he was being watched as he left. The witness was so intimidated by the encounter, he decided to travel by bus for the remainder of his journey. He wanted me to know that he was backpacked many times throughout his life and never experienced a night such as this. Investigator Marion Gant and I actually inspected the area 2 days after the encounter took place. We did find evidence of 2 Sasquatches. However, not all found evidence discovered will be shared. The area is surrounded by miles of forest. A power line easement is very close. It is thought that the Sasquatches might make use of the clearing of the easements to travel along. Several prints and 2 sizes were found. There were also several tracks of prints, morning or evening. We saw huge supplies of other food sources for Sasquatch too. We did not find any rocks in the area that could have been thrown, but found several large apple snail shells that were possibly thrown at the witness. Behind where the witness's hammock was is a huge big boy trail. This is a game trail that is much taller than what a normal game trail is. When something as tall as a squatch walks through the woods, the branches and trees are bare and broken up high to accommodate them. Marion and I agree that the witness was preventing one or both of these Sasquatches from traversing to the other side of the bridge, thus leading to the acts of aggression he. In May of 1985, on a sunny afternoon, a realtor in Ormond Beach took me north on Beach Street. We turned left and entered the village of Pine Run. Before reaching the area of houses, I spotted what looked like a young preteen holding a tall stick vertically. Suddenly, the other than human walked on hands and feet to the middle of the road and then stood erect. My realtor slammed on the brakes and cried, "What is that?" I suggested a bear, but the shape and the head was not that of a bear. We agreed it was a monkey, due to no long tail, and it appeared to be at least 4.5 to 5 feet tall. Then, it disappeared into the woods. There was a small follow-up investigation report. The witness was looking to buy property in Ormond Beach back in the spring of 1985 with a realtor. Both ladies were driving a car west on Addison Drive, right around 1 p.m. That road borders a green area and connects with several other state parks. As they drove, they noticed a quote-unquote teenager standing on the roadside, holding a stick. As they neared, it drops down on all fours, and they thought out loud that it was a bear. It began across the road, from left to right, in front of them, acting totally unafraid. They had to slam on their brakes not to hit it. One commented that it was the strangest looking bear they had ever seen. And then the bear stood up and became clearly bipedal, very comfortably. It looked at them as it crossed about 10 feet in front of the car in a slow, easy gait. Once it passed the car, it dropped back down to quadrupedal and briefly paused to look back at them before going back into the woods. It was roughly 4.5 to 5 feet tall, woolly dark brown, and looked more ape than human. It had long limbs and looked taller because of the lankiness. One lady compared it to the size and weight of an average 12-year-old boy, although its head seemed smaller. The head didn't have as much hair on it as the body did. The women were amazed at what they were seeing, and the realtor commented that she was worried about what her client was thinking as to what wild creatures lived in the area. They realized it was not a bear, but could not figure out what it could have been. It did not have the bear ears or tail, and it was too big to be a monkey, and clearly was not a gorilla. They had heard that Bigfoots were much bigger, so didn't think of that either. They never considered that it could have been a juvenile Sasquatch or a juvenile skunk ape. Juvenile Sasquatch or skunk ape behavior has been reported many times to go from quadrupedal to bipedal and back. They have also been described as looking more ape-like than full-grown Sasquatch. This location actually borders Tomica State Park, Addison State Park, and Bolo Creek State Park. In fact, Bolo Creek Park has had several reports over the years. This first incident occurred in the fall of 1998. The witnesses were sleeping around 10 p.m. when they were awakened by two loud vocalizations. The first was more of a loud growl. The second began low and progressed to a higher pitch. It sounded like a scream. The witnesses related that it sounded as if whatever made the sounds was standing in the room with them. It was so loud. They said you could feel it. The husband got up to investigate, but found nothing. He said that his two dogs were very scared, and they would not move from where they were laying in the house. The husband stated that, "I couldn't have pried them off the floor with a spatula." The second incident occurred in October of 1999, roughly 13 months later. The wife let their dogs out in that morning. The dog involved did not return as she usually does, so the wife went out to look for her. At the bottom of the front steps, she found the dog bleeding from the stomach area. The wife took the mixed breed dog to the vet. The vet stated that the dog had been hit by something big, such as a car or something. The witness said that this dog had never went to the street, which, at the time, was approximately 200 yards away from the house. The dog weighed 25 pounds. The injuries included massive internal injuries and a 1.5-inch cut on her stomach. The vet said that it was a puncture wound of some sort, and also the dog's rib was broken. Unfortunately, the dog died. The witness believes that the dog walked up on a Bigfoot and was kicked by the creature. The cut on her stomach could have been where its toenail had cut her. A follow-up investigation report provided even more horrifying information. On Friday, March 17th, 2000, the witness called with an incident that had just occurred during Bike Week on Wednesday, March 8, 2000, with some friends and himself. The group was sitting around the fire pit on the northeastern corner of the property when they heard something large moving through the woods nearby. The fire was large and bright, and they saw the reflection of one eye. The reflection was red, and the eye was approximately 1.5 inches around. The creature, from position of the eye, was on their side of the creek, which runs along the north side of the property, then crossed over the creek and walked around east of them. It then came back towards them. It even made loud noises moving through the woods, snapping branches, etc. The eye was easily 7+ feet off the ground. The witness stated that the eye was too big in diameter to belong to an owl. No footprints were ever found. First of all, I am a 57-year-old high school and college psychology and humanities teacher with a background in phenomenon research. I hold 2 master's degrees, and I have often been nicknamed the resident skeptic because I simply demand scientific principles in real time for all observable data. I despise hoaxes. My wife and I were standing on a boardwalk on a bright, moonlit night around 11:30 p.m., back in June of 2001. I was looking north when I first saw it, about 100 yards away. At first, I thought it was just a late-night jogger. After it got about 50 yards closer to me, I alert my wife to turn around, because I realized that this was not your average jogger. It walked with a very smooth, long stride, arms swinging about 2 feet in front and back. It was a uniform solid black or brown in color. No light face, hands, or shoes. We watched it walk south-right at the edge, or the surf, southward, until it disappeared down the beach, and I am quite sure that it saw us. I thought about yelling or encountering it, but the thought lasted for just 2 seconds. This thing was walking fast, with a deliberate stride and a slight forward stance. It was on a mission, as it were. There were no footprints because it was walking slightly into the water. I know what I saw, and my wife and I are in complete agreement on all details. I guess this is another incident where I can only report the data. There seems to be no way to research it, unless someone else happened to see it or confront it. I also noticed that in the local paper, an article about a lady who discovered a black bear on her patio a few days before we arrived. I at first wondered if it was the same bear, but quickly eliminated this possibility because of its quick, upright posture. Look, I'm an avid hunter and fisherman from Kentucky. I have seen 2 black bears in the wild, at least. This was no comparison. My friend and I were spotting gators one night in Ormond Beach, Florida, when we had an encounter with something, well, unknown. We were near a lake when we heard something large in the woods, right behind us. When we shone our lights into the woods to see what was making the noises, we heard a series of blunt beating noises, about a second or 2 apart. The sound was like that of a wooden baseball bat hitting a tree over and over. This went on from about 30 seconds to a minute before the tree fell. As we heard the crackling of the falling tree, we ran back towards the nearest safe place to us. At the same time, we heard in the woods to our left something almost stalking and following our every move. Once we got to civilization and realized we were now out of danger, we then decided to go back to find out the source of what had happened. When we returned, nearly an hour later, we found a tree freshly broken in half. The break being about 8 feet from the ground. The break was also not a clean cut, like that of a saw, an axe, or a hatchet. Rather like the tree had been bent to its breaking point. We knew this was a fresh break from the dripping sap, which next day was so dry, it was definitely the source of the noise of a falling tree. On a branch about 7 feet from the ground, we found a hair sample. The hair is still yet to be identified. The best description we can give it is a 2 to 2.5 inch light brown hair, which is wavy with a kink close to the middle of it. The tree was about 25 to 30 feet tall, and the break was about 7 to 8 feet in the air. At waist, the diameter is about 10 inches, and the break being between 6 and 8 inches. Please, help us to determine if this was from a known and indigenous species, or if it was our distant friend. As of November 25th, 2012, a new report was now added to this. While walking down the dock, the woods next to the dock began moving and shaking violently. We were scared, but assuming it could be a bum, we shouted off into the woods. Eventually, the shaking stopped, and a few moments go by. We heard a knocking sound. It sounded like a 4x4 sized piece of wood hitting a tree. The knocking went on for several minutes, and we continued to yell, trying to figure out what it was. Next, the scariest part. A tree about 25 to 30 feet from the dock began rocking violently. Still screaming, the tree fell toward the dock, and we began running. The whole time, we heard something keeping pace parallel to us on the dock and grunting. We later went back and found a brown-red hair hanging from the bottom of a branch. The hair, obviously, later in the week, we returned with another person and to plant a cantaloupe on the tree in question. We then heard a loud wheezing noise, which sounded close to a boar being startled in its sleep. The cantaloupe was later found completely dug out, with the shell still perfectly intact. The hole was only about 6 inches in diameter. No other damage was done to the shell. I do know of a lady who had moved to the area. She and a realtor were looking for properties when a large ape-looking man ran out in front of the road. When the realtor honked the horn, it stood up on its hind legs, looked at the two women, and ran off into the woods. This was about 20 years ago. I've heard of this locally. My husband and I live in Florida, in Hillsborough County, next to the wildlife preserve. One day, about 2 weeks ago, we were traveling on Highway 301, and I saw a sign that said Dead River. I glanced to look at the river, as this was in broad daylight. What I saw, I'll never forget. I didn't even believe in Bigfoot before this, and I saw a big white furry animal standing straight up like a human, crossing over the stream. We were traveling fast on the road, so we couldn't just stop. I told my husband I just saw an animal, as I was in shock about what I had seen. He didn't see it, because he was driving. It took me 2 days to realize I had just seen a Bigfoot. I think I was in shock about what I'd seen. Also, where I saw it, it was very close to our RV park, River Palm. When we entered the park, there was this horrific smell. Did not connect the two things at the time, but some say they smell rotten. Don't know if it was connected to the incident or not. No witnesses, just me getting a quick glance. It was around 2 p.m. as well. There was also a follow-up investigation report by a person by the name of R. Monteith. The witness and her husband had recently just moved to Florida. On Tuesday, November 20th, 2018, they were returning from the store at approximately 2 p.m., heading north on Highway 301, a 2-lane road in Thanatos. It was a sunny day with a high of 77. Now the speed limit on 301 is 60, but they were slowing down as their turn was less than a quarter mile away. She was the passenger, and as they passed over Two Hole Branch Creek, she noticed this large bipedal figure that was white off to the right, and it appeared to be stepping over the creek, heading southbound. It was standing upright, and she saw a leg in mid-step. Her sighting was a second or two, but she realized it wasn't a man. It didn't have clothes or shoes on, and it appeared to have white hair all over its body. The height of the figure was hard for her to judge, as the road is higher than the creek, and she was looking down on it. But it seemed to be similar to a large human. The head appeared rounded. Its hands were at its side. She estimated the figure to be about 20 yards from the car. It never looked at the car. It appeared to be walking confidently, with purpose. She claimed she had never thought these creatures existed. When her husband mentioned to his brother that his wife may have seen one, the brother told them of a sighting that he and his mother had at their childhood home, many years ago, back in Iowa. His mother confirmed the sighting. They had seen a Bigfoot eating mulberries in the yard. The witness, her husband, and I went to the location at about the same time of her sighting. The sign she speaks of in her report, of saying Dead River, is just before the small bridge, but refers to the next road, Dead River Road, not the name of the creek. The creek is called Two Branches Creek, and it is one of the creeks that flows off the Hillsborough River. This section of Highway 301 runs right along Hillsborough State Park and the Lower Hillsborough Wilderness Preserve. There's a small bridge over the creek. The witness claims there was more water in the creek in November than the day we were there in March. This is most likely correct, as this is Florida's dry season, and the rains really don't begin until about May. This area is heavily treed. The old Atlantic Coastline Railroad used to run right along this road. In fact, remnants of it are still visible. It's about 50 yards away from the highway, where the railroad was as much higher than the surrounding forest. This Bigfoot was walking in between the old railroad and the highway. Footprints around the creek bed were deer, pig, and alligator. It is evident that many smaller animals also walk the area too. Actually, just east of this area are many strawberry fruit farms. North is a dairy farm. Following the Hillsborough River, going north leads to the Green Swamp. Heading south leads to Cypress Creek area, of which both have had numerous Bigfoot reports. First, I'll start with the fact that I have never put much stock into the Bigfoot phenomenon. I have degrees in wildlife management and wildlife biology. I have been working as a biologist for the last 17 years. I have never believed that something could exist that has never left any concrete evidence. Furthermore, nothing similar has ever been found in the fossil record that I know of, so this has led me to believe that it was all false. Until the weekend of November 24th, 2013. I'm an avid bird watcher and wildlife photographer. I take very long hikes in various wild areas around Tampa about this time of year to photograph whatever I find. I was hiking at Cypress Creek Preserve, which is in between Interstate 275 and 75, near the apex where they meet. I was walking on one of the rather wide trails, and I came to a stop due to hearing a noise. I had seen quite a few wild pigs that morning, and I thought I could photograph one crossing the trail in front of me. So I was looking down at my camera, adjusting the ISO settings, and I saw something large moving out of the corner of my eye to my left, approximately 200 feet away. As soon as I saw the movement, I looked directly at it, and it was already halfway across the trail at this point. My eyes were directly on the animal as it walked, upright, across the rest of the trail into the palmettos. It was incredibly large. I mean, at least 6 feet tall or more. Completely black in color, with a very wide chest from front to back. It was walking completely upright, with a very fast, purposeful pace. The animal was leaning forward slightly, but did not seem awkward with its steps, like a bear would be walking upright. I slowly walked over to the spot where I saw it cross, and I could still hear it moving through the woods in the distance. I then immediately noticed that all the birds around me had stopped chirping, and even the insects had stopped making noise as well. I looked for tracks or hair left on the plants in the area, but came up with nothing. I was able to get a picture of the palmetto on the trail, though, where it had crossed, and I put my tripod near it for height comparison. Just so you know, I am extremely knowledgeable about the wildlife in Florida, but I cannot explain what type of animal that I saw this time. Also, it was around 9 in the morning, overcast, about 60 degrees. There was a follow-up investigation done by R. Monteith. The witness is a biologist at a local area animal park. He has even taught college-level courses on bear and knows that what he witnessed that morning was neither bear or man. The gentleman's professional standing and occupation lead this report to be credible and very sound. The biologist went to Cypress Creek Nature Preserve in the morning to photograph birds. He saw much wildlife while hiking to a spot to set up his camera. About 1 mile into the trail, at exactly 9:04 a.m., he set up his camera tripod. While doing so, heard a noise, turned to his left, and looked. About 50 to 60 yards away from him was a Sasquatch crossing the trail. Unfortunately, the camera was pointed in the opposite direction, and he was unable to take a photo. He described a Sasquatch at more than 6 feet tall, black in color, and having a very wide torso. It was muscular in its profile, and it walked briskly across the trail, left to right, never looking in his direction. Its gait had a forward lean to it, and he described the walk as very smooth. The facial features blended into the dark face, and he was not able to see them. There were no apparent breasts or tail that he could see. The head was round, but larger than a human. He walked up to where it had been on the trail and can only hear it walking away. He noticed that the woods became quiet after the sighting. The area of this sighting is very close to my own home, as the preserve borders my property. It is a state-recognized wildlife corridor that connects the Hillsborough River and the Green Swamp in Pasco and Polk counties. We received numerous reports from both of these areas, by the way. I was able to get to the location 2 days after the event. When I get to the location of the trail crossing, I noticed several tree breaks in both directions, indicating something large had walked through. Interestingly, while I was photographing the broken branches, a tree about 25 yards away from me crashed to the ground. I ventured in that direction, singing softly, but was unable to detect any other movement. I got off work right around 2 a.m., back in May of 1996, and it was 2 in the morning, and I was going home. I took a left on Hopewell Road, off of Highway 39, made the left turn on the road. As I was driving, less than a minute, a car heading to me was speeding and flashing their headlight high beams. I didn't know if it was teens playing around or maybe somebody that just had a little too much to drink. So I blew it off. As I was coming to the curve, there was a fence, maybe 4 to 5 feet tall. As I was going around the curve, my headlights caught something that looked to be 3 to 4 feet taller than the fence. It looked at me with these red eyes. I felt numb, frightened. I always think about the other person that was driving that night. What did they see? The site has now been developed since then. All the trees are almost gone, and a follow-up investigation report by Caroline Curtis was done. I spoke to the witness, driving back to the location at hand. There is a creek, several mining pits or ponds, railroad tracks, orange groves, and only one house nearby. The area has not really changed dramatically in the past 10 years, though there are fewer orange trees now. The old barbed wire fence is roughly 4 feet high. What she saw possibly came from a nearby orange grove and then crossed the road. She had slowed down just before she saw the human-like figure clearing the fence to her right. It was about twice the height of the fence, and uniformly, all dark in color. When I asked about the eyes, she said this: they reminded her of a deer in the headlights, except it wasn't a deer. The color was brake light red, and seemed to be reflecting off her headlights as it looked her way. She describes the fear that came over her as a white feeling, comparing it to the sensation one has before passing out, or when you sense something really bad is about to happen. This possible sighting occurred on the edge of Four Corners, the world's largest phosphate mine, which spans 58,000 plus acres. The mining company has restored much of the stripped land to provide habitat for wildlife. Approximately 350 species of animals inhabit the restored areas, including several threatened species. What's to say a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot could not be a part of those species? If you or someone you know has a story, encounter, or experience you would like to share with my viewers, please send it to my email at stories@whatlurksbeneath.com. Thank you. This all happened within the span of a week. I was messing around with some friends after school by the Salt River. We were talking when we noticed something out of the corner of our eyes. It looked like some kind of human, but with a full set of fur on its body. You bet your sweet butt, me and my friends got out of there as quick as we could. I thought that would be the last we saw of it, but no. We saw it again just a few days later. This time, we were walking up the road near the first place we found it. My friend had to take a whiz, so he went into the woods. A couple of minutes later, I heard him scream. I got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. It turns out he went to pee behind a log and found some footprints. Shortly after this, we heard what sounded like throwing rocks. That's when he screamed. This all happened about 2 years ago. We have not seen it since. I remember 6 years ago, when I was 19, me and a few friends went backpacking in the Appalachian Range of Pennsylvania. We had set up camp in the early afternoon. We knew it was a dangerous area, so we each brought guns for protection against bears. Anyway, as it got closer to the evening, at around 5 p.m., I was fishing in a river about a quarter mile away from camp, and I started to smell something bad. I couldn't describe the smell, it was just bad. I heard some rustling in the bushes about 200 yards away. It was quite clear that it was footsteps from the sound of it. Almost thinking that it was one of my friends, I realized that they were south of me, so I started to panic. Whatever it was getting closer to me and my fishing spot, and the smell started getting stronger. My fishing pole in my left hand and my right hand on my gun as I was getting ready to unholster it. I couldn't get over the smell, but at the same time, I was worried about my life. I kept my eyes looking in the direction of the loud footsteps. I could see a big open area, kind of like a pasture, about 65 yards away, where the footsteps are coming from. I see what I think is a man in a possible reddish-brown ghillie suit walking behind the trees on the edge of an open area. But the problem is that about 2 to 3 feet taller than me, as I'm only 6'2", which was unbelievable. None of my friends are close to my height, but that thing that I saw was built. I can see the muscle movement of its legs. I'm no expert about Sasquatch, but I do know what I saw was no bear, as it was walking on 2 legs, and not in any way that I've ever seen. Both the legs and arms are primitively built, like an oversized gorilla. The thing probably weighed, about 900 pounds. It ended up vanishing as it went to my right in the deeper part of the woods, but after the footsteps had stopped. I heard what sounded like chatter, kind of like some sort of Indian language. After the chatter stopped, the footsteps started up again. But it was footsteps going in one direction and another sound of footsteps going in the opposite direction. I never told my friends about the experience because I didn't want them thinking that I was crazy. Some people might be skeptic about this, but I know what I saw and heard.
Let me start with I'm a 37-year-old who has seen many things from Dogman, alien, ghosts, even what most would call a vampire. Not sure if it was really one or something else. I've sent this to a few more YouTubers like you, but have never heard back. I have an unwanted draw to these things. The encounter I wish to share with you today is one that started back on 2007, just a few years after Hurricane Katrina. I was almost a year into my new job, working on ATMs, and I was driving home from Houma, Louisiana, on Interstate 90. It was quite late, nearly midnight, and I was the only person on the road at the time. You have to watch out for gators crossing on this back highway. I was about a mile or two past the 90, 316 crossing, so you could look it up on Google Maps to see. There in the road was a 6 to 8 foot gator. So I was just seating in my van, waiting for the gator to cross when it goes into attack stance. Coiled the tail up next to the body and head. I could hear it hissing, like there was something out there. I started to look around because a gator that big is not usually scared of anything but boats. From the left side of the road, a large, nearly 10-foot dog-like creature leapt out and attacked the gator. It nearly bit the neck in half, and also left arm claws was digging deep into the stomach of the gator. When the gator stopped moving, the creature stood up. Its eyes sighted red from my headlights. Blood dripped from its claws and teeth. The creature growled and showed its bloody teeth at me. It felt like a lifetime passed before it let out a howl and grabbed the gator and ran off into the woods. But it all happened in just a few moments. I'm not sure it was a dogman or something else like a werewolf. I would like to hear what you think on the matter. I still live in southern Louisiana, very close to Honey Island Swamp, and yes, I do have stories from there. Some of mine are some of my hunters' friends. My encounter happened in winter of 2015. I was shoveling snow in the driveway to make room for some family that was going to visit. Normally, I shovel a space about 2.5 car widths for the family vehicle and my older brother's car beside it. This time, I had to make the path onto the property a little wider and then make space for 2 more vehicles. Being an upstate New Yorker, there is no sense in shoveling while it is still snowing, and the forecast says there's more to come. What I did was put rock salt all over what was already cleared so ice wouldn't form, and then waited for it to lessen or flurries to stop. By the time it stopped, it was about 5 in the afternoon and getting dark. I figured, what the heck, the snow is light enough so I could power through it before long. I've done this all my life, every winter. I've dealt with icy, heavy snow that ruins your back and shoulders and the light fluffy stuff that you see in cozy paintings. I put in my earbuds as I usually do for monotonous work and got to it. Usually, I wear one so I could hear if someone calls me from the house. I wrap the loose one around my neck so it won't tug on the other as I work. Now, this winter had been awful. 2 weeks of single-digit weather and a wind chill between 20 and 30 below zero. Any skin exposed just hurts, and you shake uncontrollably if you aren't dressed in layers with snow pants and a coat, or in my case, thermal coveralls. We're used to this climate, but it can be dangerous if you slip up. A few years before, a guy got stuck in a blizzard and just slept in his car. The thing is, normally snow will cover the car and you're insulated. This was more of a whiteout, so it was blinding more than it was covering. To put it shortly, the cold wasn't buffered by enough snow and this fellow didn't wake up. It's sad, I know. People should never underestimate or underprepare for Mother Nature. To get back to it, I was working as fast as I could when I heard a familiar sound. A neighbor down the road, a ways, Mr. McNeil, was tearing up the road. He has fits of anger where he'll speed off and go into the lesser Catskill Mountains. Basically, if you follow the road northeast from where we lived, you can head into town or go up into the mountains. There are a few dirt paths and narrow trails that only locals really know of or can point out. He's gone from around 5 or 6 p.m. until 6:45. I think he made most of the tire mark paths up there from all his trips. As I turned to watch him drive up the road, I noticed something in the forest across the street. To make a clearer image, I'm standing in our driveway. There is a thin tree line at the end of it, bordering the road. 15 or so feet from the road is the forest. Now, I know what black bears look like. As a kid, they'd be in our backyard now and then. I was 3 feet from 2 of them once, with a back door in between us. I know how big they are, how they move, and what they look like on all fours, and even 2 feet. This was not a bear. This thing was on all fours, but rose up on 2 as it turned to see what was making the noise. The head was huge and wolf-like. I could see its tongue quickly moisten its nose. It was very dark brown, near black. I'd say it was easily 7 foot tall minimum. The arms were long and its chest kind of puffed out. My guts went into a knot like never before. As McNeil's headlights came into view, I looked back over the road. He wouldn't even see me if I tried to signal. He must have been going at least 50 miles an hour. He tore up and across before I could even raise up my shovel. That thing was watching the truck, head on a swivel. It kind of ruffled its fur and got back on all fours. I was slowly walking backward, my heart beating so loud I couldn't hear the caked snow crunching under my feet. Just as I reached the porch and put a foot on the first step, it took off. The thing moved like lightning, taking huge leaps on all fours. I was going after the truck. I could only think to myself, get inside, get inside. No doubt in my mind, he saw it in his rear view or side mirror. I got inside and told my family what happened. Well, they weren't sold on it being anything other than a bear, of course. Mr. McNeil came back way later than ever, at 9:30. He was slower this time, shining a light in the woods where the creature had been standing. He rolled by slow and kept shining that light back and forth. I'm just glad he came back at all. This would wrap up my experience, but I wanted to add that 6 days later, something terrible happened. A local came into the diner in town with bloody sleeves and hands. His sister, a cook at the diner, came out where he called her to the counter. Before she could ask, he said that the dogs were torn to bits. This guy was a real mountain man. He hunted everything and trained dogs all his life and was shaking like a leaf. 6 80-something pound dogs torn apart. These weren't pets. I met them many times as they grew up. With a half-second whisper, they could swarm anything with a viciousness like you wouldn't believe. He asked for her keys and said he'd leave something in the glove compartment. He didn't want her coming or going without it. We all knew it was a weapon. I looked over to my brother and gave him a face. We went over what I encountered quietly, and I think he was coming around. Also, Mr. McNeil wouldn't say much when he spoke of it, but I think he got a real good look at the thing. He didn't drive off as often anymore. We moved the following year. Not that this had anything to do with it, just personal stuff like work and college. I just want to say that everyone should always have backup kits in their cars for bad weather, and then if you could avoid rural travel at night, do so. I apologize for the length of the post, but maybe somebody can shed some light on what I saw. I work as a paramedic in rural area of Virginia. This entails a lot of backwoods mountain roads late at night. This encounter happened around summer of 2016. One night around 2 or 3 a.m., I was driving back from a call and was traveling up a road I have been up many times before. My partner and I were just listening to music and making the best of being at work. As I rounded an upward slanted curve, the headlight of my unit hit something that still gives me chills to this day as I'm typing. This creature was almost in a position that reminded me of a catcher in baseball, as if it was squatting beside the road, maybe 10 feet in a small grassy patch. It was so pale and white. I distinctly remember its arms and legs being so long, just unnaturally long and slender. Its fingers were the same. If I had to estimate its height, I would say it was easily 6 feet tall. Its head was facing away from me. I honestly did not get a good look to see any facial features. I literally was shocked. I didn't speak a word. I turned to my partner, who was in the passenger seat, and the look on his face told me I was not seeing an imaginary thing. I said to him, "Please tell me what you saw. Keep this PG." He agreed and did it with a lot of colorful words. I may have been 50 yards away when we agreed to turn around and look again. When we get back to the same place, there was nothing. I honestly didn't have the courage to get out of the ambulance to check. My partner did pull out a spotlight we have in our units to check the woods, and again, nothing. I can't stress how pale, bony, and slender this creature was. It was like the pale man from Pan's Labyrinth, but I could see every bone in its body. I only got a 2 to 3 second look at this creature. Does anybody have insight? It was about a month ago that I learned of the crawler identification. While listening to a podcast, actually, and this guest described an encounter with this creature, I finally learned the name of what I feel best describes what I saw in 2002 and 2003. Both of my encounters take place along the Texas border with Mexico. The first encounter, I was with a friend exploring irrigation canals at night in the farmlands near my house. These canals are elevated about 20 feet, and water is down at the bottom of the trench. While driving, the truck's headlights illuminated a small, lanky, gray-white creature on the side of the canal. As soon as the headlights hit the crawler, it leapt into the darkness of the canal, with similar ease as a cat might jump. Both my friend and I immediately shouted, "What was that?" The chupacabra in my area's local cryptid legend, until I learned of the existence of the crawler. I had assumed a chupacabra was what I saw, or some type of alien gray, but the descriptions of the chupacabra don't accurately describe a crawler, and the many descriptions of the crawler are spot on with what I saw. The second encounter was at my house. Occasionally, I would climb up onto the second story of my family home for a bit of stargazing. While lying on my back, staring into the sky, I heard a noise coming from the other end of the roof. Thinking it was probably a possum just messing around, I tilted my head from the sky to the direction of the sound. Something was slowly moving towards me in the dark, from the end of the roof. For a few moments, I stayed in place, just trying to focus and make an identification of the animal. It wasn't until the creature got about halfway across the roof my eyes could finally pick up on the features, disqualifying it from being any other animal native to my area. It looked like a small, hairless person, crawling on its long, lanky hands and feet. Needless to say, I didn't stick around any longer. I hauled ass down the tree I'd come up, back to the safety of the house. I was with two of my friends exploring this mountain next to an abandoned winery, where apparently a family died there, and on our way down from climbing the mountain, after we spotted a dark figure with our camera at the top from an old farm where we got to the bottom. We went over the hill a little, and I say a family that looked like a ghost. This happened 1 year ago when we ate food and went back out an hour later, and then we saw an unidentifiable object in the sky, and it looked like it crashed into the same mountain where we just were, and went back, and nothing was there. So, a year ago, me and a friend were coming back from going swimming in a local town. My friend lives in a little town called Holton. As we were cycling along, my friend's tire collapsed, so we tried fixing it. Suddenly, a howl erupts from the woods, and with me binge-watching nature documentaries and knowing a bit about animals, I couldn't place it. It was incredibly deep, and the entire woods and wilderness fell silent. We worked harder and harder, with one of us looking over the woods we were in. After a while, I saw it. 2 red eyes and pointy ears behind a bush, around 50 meters away from us. As we bolted, we decided to come back today. It really scared us when we came back, and saw that the bush it was looking over was as tall as me. I was 5'3" at the time. The beast I saw was a hellhound. As I recall, I recently had to do a DoorDash delivery from Houston to a foresty suburb in Pasadena. I was driving down a dark forest road at 1 a.m. I was feeling a little spooked because it was so damn dark on the road and empty. I honestly didn't even expect to do a delivery all the way from Houston to Pasadena, so I was annoyed, even though the pay was decent. All of a sudden, as I'm driving, some flying animal almost hits my dashboard and flies right past me as I'm driving. My reaction was from surprise to excitement, as I had just seen something crazy. From what I had seen, it was a bat, but about the size of my windshield. And to be honest, I have never seen such a huge bat in Texas to this very day. Any of you guys ever had encounters with abnormally larger humanoids? This is going to sound pretty unbelievable, but it scared the crap out of me. I used to live in this huge trailer house. It was 60 to 100 feet from front to back. That night, everyone else was sleeping in the front of the house since we didn't have school the next day. I decided to sleep in the back by myself. I'm not what you call a psychic, but I do seem to attract weird experiences. I was up late reading a book on spirits and getting rid of them. It was around midnight when I went to bed. All evening I had a growing feeling something was wrong. I was getting more and more uneasy, to the point where I was almost sick. I finally decided to go to bed and went to turn out the light. It turned off and laid in bed. In the room I used to have, the bathroom was right across the room, directly facing the bed. I turned around so my back was facing the bathroom. As soon as I did, I heard a growling behind me. It got closer and I heard footsteps with it. I felt this thing lean over me. I actually smelt its breath. I didn't directly see it though. I could have chalked it up to sleep paralysis, except for one thing. As I was laying there, it either drooled or dropped some kind of sticky liquid on my head. It kept growling the whole time. Eventually, it stood up straight, and I got the impression it was really tall, like 7 or 8 feet. I had laid there not doing anything, and then all of a sudden burst of courage come up, and I decided to turn around. I did this to find nothing there. I remember seeing its ears leaning over me, and the sulfur-like smell it gave off. I know I didn't dream it because when I got up, my hair was still wet and sticky from where it had drooled on me. I don't know what it was. Does anybody out there know? My husband and I were driving home down Winchester's Southern Road towards Street Route 22 around 9 p.m. on 12/20/19. It was completely dark outside by this time. We were going around 60 miles an hour. My husband was on high alert for deer. We were just talking to each other when we approached the right-hand turn off to Wyandotte Road. My husband fell silent. He saw a very large, very tall, bipedal creature running toward the road from the left-hand side. Within a split second, I also saw this creature as it continued approaching the road at a full run. It entered into the peripheral of our headlights and came within 2 to 3 feet of the driver's side window. Comparing the creature to our truck, it had to have been nearly 8 feet tall, as it was slightly slouched while running and was a head taller than our truck. It had blondish red fur and domed shoulder head area. Since we were going around 60 miles an hour as all of this happened, it ended up barely missing our truck and crossing the road behind us. We didn't speak for 15 to 20 seconds until my husband finally said, "What was that?" We immediately turned around and traveled down Wyandotte Road in the direction it went behind us, but I did not see or hear anything. We also used a spotlight from the truck to look along the road on both sides where we initially saw it, but did not see any disturbance. The next morning, We stopped at the exact spot again and looked for anything on the ground in the area, but did not see anything. My two best friends and I would take night rides into Harriman State Park late at night to see what we could spot at night. For example, bear, deer, fox, etc. It's a beautiful park, and the solitude at night in the off-season makes the park special, and creepy too. As we were driving the very windy Garden Valley Road, we had to go slow due to the turns and danger of the steep drop-offs on the roadside. I was a front seat passenger, high beams on, driving no more than 25 to 35 miles an hour. At the max viability of the headlight, I see the outline of a large upright being running across in front of us and leaping the bank on the high side of the road, instantly disappearing into the rhododendron thickets. I freaked out upon first visual and alerted my friends. The driver hit the brakes, windows open. We could hear thrashing of the ground from running, but the sighting was over. My friend, the driver, did see the movement but couldn't make out what made it. We both agreed on the sound of it fleeing up the steep slope. What solidified my two friends' belief in what I saw was the look of fright and amazement on my friend's face. Features of the upright being I saw were large, thick hair-covered legs, human-like strides, and tall enough that the headlights did not focus above its midsection, so I couldn't make out any facial features. We were not drinking or doing any illegal substances. So, I'm an avid hunter, and I used to hunt the Corps of Engineers land on the Texas side of the Red River. I was going to get my trail camera and check the pictures for any sign of wild hogs moving along the river and eating at the bait I had set up. When I pulled up to the parking area, I was the only truck there. It's hot in the summer, and in those woods, there is little breeze. It's about a 20-minute walk through the woods to the camera, so I had navigated my way through the brush and had come around the old piece of original bridge supports and turned slightly northwest, and something yelled at me about 100 yards away through the woods. It's hard to describe the noise. It didn't taper off, just a blast. I froze, and I don't know why, but my instinct was to whoop at it. I whooped, and it remained frozen too. I knew where it was, but I couldn't see it through the trees. I raised my rifle to locate whatever it was through the scope. I systematically started searching, and all of a sudden, it tore off through the woods. I saw a glimpse of it through the scope as it took off. What I saw is difficult to explain, but you know how a skier's legs look when they are crouched? It was like that, like a spring compressing the knees to unleash power. The sun shone through the trees, and I could see the legs had reddish-brown fur, but was shaggier than a deer. Almost like coarse hog hair, but was soft. Everything about this makes me want to say it was a deer. The fur color, the legs bent. I would even entertain a deer having shaggier fur. But the yell is what makes me know it was something else. Its yell was intimidating and demanding. It knew I was there, and was letting me know it was there. After it ran off, I was filled with a sense of dread and had to talk myself out of not going back to the truck and leaving the camera.